Welcome to another episode of Raising Them Up,
our Christian parenting Q&A podcast, and we're your hosts.
I'm Israel Wayne.
And I'm Brook Wayne.
Welcome to another episode of the Raising Them Up Parenting Q&A podcast, where we answer your questions. We have some great questions lined up for today, but we would also love for you to submit your question. You can do that a few different ways. One is by visiting the website for this podcast, which is raisingthemup.org. You can also call in your question at 1-800-223-6567. Or you can email raisingthemup@generations.org, and we will attempt to answer your question on a future episode. So without any further ado, let us traverse. What's Sally Forth? That's that one. We listened to this audio book years ago. It was a G.A. Henty audio book. I think Jim Hodges did it.
I'm pretty sure.
And the character in the book, it was something in British history. He said it like an inordinate amount of times. We were on a road trip.
And so 20 hours later, whatever.
Sally Forth. And so by the time our children got back, they were all talking like they were British and saying Sally Forth. So we're going to Sally Forth with our first question.
So this is related to dyslexia. It says, I am in need of homeschooling advice for dyslexia. My oldest son, who's 13, has dyslexia, and he has received reading tutoring for a year now. My other sons, 10 and 8, are also struggling or behind learning to read, which puts them behind in other subjects. I am desperately needing solutions for homeschooling that can be used with dyslexic students, as I am struggling to teach it all.
Well, I can relate to this because growing up being homeschooled, I was both attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and dyslexic. And so having both of those conditions was a challenge for me. The reading part was very difficult for me. One thing that I did is I had a short-term memory that was pretty good, where I could memorize things, again, not long-term, but short-term. And so I memorized probably a few hundred sight words. And I memorized them pictographically. Like if I would see the word tree, I would memorize it like a picture of a tree. And so because I had a few hundred sight words memorized, I could, quote unquote, read. The problem was that I couldn't actually break down or decode or decipher anything that I didn't know that wasn't a predictable sight word.
Right.
And so it wasn't until I was about 10 years old that it kind of became plain that I couldn't read. The good thing for me was that I was homeschooled because what I had to do is go back and relearn phonics. And having a good foundation for phonics is essential as it relates to dealing with dyslexia. And one of the programs that I really love is a program called Alpha Phonics by Samuel Blumenfeld. Now, Sam Blumenfeld was one of the greatest historians on education of the past 50 years. He also was a great advocate for literacy. And so Alpha Phonics is kind of like the old McGuffey readers, which is how most Americans learned to read for 200 years of our early American history. And those books still work, but Sam Blumenfeld kind of developed a little bit more modernized version of the McGuffies in Alpha Phonics. He also has videos and audio lectures where he teaches you sort of how to teach phonetically and how to overcome dyslexia in a sense. And so I highly recommend getting his resources. If you're good at Google, you can actually find free downloadable PDF copies of Alpha Phonics. There's like the teacher's guide, there's the phonograms and all of that. And then there's also videos online, YouTube and other places where Sam talks about dyslexia and reading disorders. So I'm going to just recommend Samuel Blumenfeld and his Alpha Phonics materials as a really great way to help a student to get really grounded in phonics. I didn't know about that when I was 10, right? So what was available at the time was a lot of these kiddie sing and play kind of programs,
right?
Which
hard to
I
do
hated,
when you're young,
right? When you're 10, you don't want to be doing a 5-year-old curriculum, but that was what was available at the time. And so The only reason I made it through was because I could lock myself in my room and play these cassettes, or I think some of them were albums at the time, listen to these audio things. And so I got through it. But if I had been in school, my personality, I'm probably not, like most students, but I wouldn't have done the special ed class. Like for me, I would have just not done it. I would have refused. Or if they made me go, I'd refuse to participate. So homeschooling was a must for me in being able to get past that. So anyway, but then developing coping mechanisms for me, I was probably 17, I would guess, 18 in that range, when I had a conversation with two homeschool conference speakers that I really looked up to at the time. And they were broader speakers than just homeschool, but that's how I met them. And asked them how they were able to read so many books and learn so much and be productive when they traveled a lot and so forth. And they both told me that they listened to audiobooks. This is back in the early 90s. And they said, no, any way that you can assimilate the information and that you'll remember and that you can use it, that's a great thing.
Right.
And so, as we're recording this podcast, we're actually, you'll hear this probably in 2026, but we're on the tail end of 2025. I've just finished 42 books and about 11,000 pages plus the Bible 1.5 times this year, all the way through. That's almost all audio.
Yeah, me being a stickler on reading books, not that I dislike audiobooks, but I have a harder time understanding them. And I've finished maybe 3.5.
Yeah, well, you're a visual learner. I'm an auditory learner.
Yeah.
And so I just found that not only was it a coping mechanism for me, but I don't know if I was naturally that way, but it became my dominant learning style, being auditory.
Well, and I talked with a homeschool mom who had a child that was sick. I think I'm guessing it was mono, maybe 13, 14 years old, maybe 12, 13. And it was interesting because she said they did a lot of audiobooks because she said even though he was dyslexic also, the learning to actually read and take in the visual information was not great, was not developed yet, had some issues there, with the words jumping all over the page and that. His mind was ready for deeper thoughts. And so she just plugged a lot of those in. I just thought that was a really creative solution to help bring up those other subjects that, so much of the time we think depend on reading and the textbook and all that. And yet she found a way around that.
Yeah, so I can assimilate so much information, and this takes time. Like I've done it for years, but I usually listen to audiobooks or podcasts at like 2x speed.
3 or 4 sounds like to me.
And I'll give you a hack. I don't know if this is, something that's anybody else would recommend, but this is what I do. If I can get an ebook on PDF, I then open the PDF in Word, because you can right click it, say open with Word, and it'll convert it from the PDF into a Word file. And then Word has a read aloud feature that you can click, and you can adjust the speed, and it plays faster than 2x. And so I'll put a pair of headphones on and I'll read the text on the screen while I listen to it on the headphones. So I'm getting 2 forms of information at the same time, 2 channels, I guess you would say. And so I'm seeing the words on the text, but I'm also listening to it. And I can get through a 250-page book in probably 3 hours, something like that. And so I'm playing it at some breakneck speed, of course. I can assimilate it and process it like that. But that's how I'm able to get the kind of information that I need to get in a way that's reasonable. Because if I sit down and try to read the book, it takes me, 15 minutes a page? I'm just really bad at it. Even to this day, I'm 50 years old and I'm still not a good reader. And so it's a challenge. It's something that I've worked hard at.
I think 2 things I would add to that is just that wherever our children are in their learning journey, the next thing to do is help them progress from wherever they are. And so it's easy for us to say, oh, they're behind in this because we compare them to every other 9-year-old out there. And yet the thing that our children need is the tools, the foundational tools to learn. And, with dyslexic children, it does take a lot longer. And maybe they never even really fully conquer it as we would hope they would. Yet that foundation needs to be solid in place. We can't just whip past that and and hope that it's all going to turn out somehow. And then I guess I would say too, we place so much emphasis in our culture on the academics and the certain academic route. And yet for those who simply have a situation where their brain does not function in the same way, they have other traits that sometimes actually overcompensate in order to help them. And I've seen that happen a lot where maybe they don't read as well as one would hope, and maybe they can keep learning and growing as they go into adulthood. And yet if we've equipped them with other skills and helped them see they have areas that they can shine. And character really comes to this, godly character, because all of the best learning in the world and the highest IQ and all this has really no benefit for them as a person and for the world around them if they trash it with just ruining their life, with giving into sin. And so I always, even though we talk about all this academic stuff and you progress your child to the next level, looking to their heart, working with them where they're at for that next step. So our next question, our older children are interested in finding a godly spouse, but there are no known prospects in our small town. What do you suggest for helping them with this?
Well, I remember being at a conference many years ago with Vodi Bakum. He and I were both speaking together at this conference, and the issue of church came up. And there were some people there who were saying that they don't go to church because they live so far out in the boonies, and there just aren't any good churches in their area. And I remember Vodi asking the question, why do you live where people don't live? And he said, why don't you move? And now, obviously, that sounds like a really big change.
Oh,
right?
Definitely.
But I think there's something that we have to think about. When Lot in the Bible escaped Sodom and ran to a cave with his two daughters and lived in a cave, that didn't end up working well, right? And so God calls us to live in community with other people. And is there a reason that you have to live in this rural, small town area? Maybe so. But maybe God would have you move. I'll just throw that out there as the first thing to pray about. Does God want us to relocate our family somewhere where we can be around other families that share our values and have more community? So that's the first thing to pray about. Second thing is, are you open to having your young adults, and I think you should be, visit a different church? So one story that I know of personally, there's a young man attending a small church in our area, and he knew that there wasn't anybody at that church for him to marry. And so his family was still attending this church, but he went to a larger church about 20 minutes away. And about a year later, he's in a relationship now that looks like it's going to end in marriage. And so sometimes you have to be willing to go someplace where people are, right? And so that's one possibility. I'm always kind of the default position that the best way to find your mate is to be serving the Lord. And so if you're serving the Lord and you're walking in the direction of doing what God's given you to do with your life, you're most likely going to meet someone walking along that road who's also doing what God's called them to do with their life, and that the two of you get to walk along the road together.
That's a lot like 1 Timothy, I think 4:12. Be an example of all these things. And if you're doing that, if you're being an example of a faithful believer, that's going to come out naturally.
Yeah, we met through Christian publishing because I worked in Christian publishing. She worked in Christian publishing. I was in Michigan. She was in Phoenix, Arizona. So we were 1,700 miles apart, and this was really before the internet. But the Lord caused our paths to cross because of our work. And if you want to hear our story, you can actually download the audiobook and ebook of our story of how we met and married. It's called What God Has Joined Together. If you go to familyrenewal.org/store and look up What God Has Joined Together, you can download that audiobook, ebook. It talks about how we got married without dating and actually without courting. It's a fascinating story. It's family friendly. Children love it. You can just listen to the audiobook together as a family. I would highly encourage you to do that. It's just kind of a faith builder of how God can put you together with somebody on the other side of the country, even before there's an internet. That God is sovereign and he can do things that we can't do. And so I think we have to trust him. But there's this balance, right, between the sovereignty of God and man's participation and our obedience. And so there are times where sometimes we have to be proactive. And I think things like short-term mission trips, maybe going to a Bible training institute, or some people meet their spouse at a Christian college or university, or some service is one of the things that I always think is great. If you can be involved in service projects that are ministry based, I think those are really good opportunities. We know of people who have actually gotten married through online dating services. We're not really fans of the typical dating scenario, but your brother actually met well, that's not true. It's a long story. He got married because of an online Christian dating type of community. But the long story short was he and his wife actually met at our wedding. What was it, like 10 years before?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
So they met in person at our wedding, he and his future wife. And then 10 years later, the computer matched them up, but they'd already met a decade before. Kind of a cool story. I don't know whether to advocate for that or not. We know of a lot of people who have gotten married that way.
It's been a blessing.
I always think that you got to be careful, because I'm scared of people. Like, I don't do a lot of Facebook marketplace and stuff like that, because, I want to live. But we know people who have, right? So, that's a thought. What are some thoughts that you have in 30 seconds or less before we call our time?
Obviously prayer, lots and lots of prayer, because God knows where this is going to happen and how it's going to happen and all that. And so I think seeking the Lord on this, and he may not have marriage for everyone. So we don't want to just like thrust our whole life into
that's true.
Just seeking and seeking and seeking, when it's like, well, wait, you don't know the future. You need to be open to opportunities, but trusting in the Lord is really the crux of this whole issue.
And trust God and seek God, right? Rather than seeking a mate, like seek God. But I do think that sometimes we have to get outside the four walls of our house. And go to where people are. Yeah,
I was asking our married daughter, who just got married a couple months ago, what she would say about this topic. She's in her 20s. And she was like, just being able to take the opportunities God puts in front of you. So the way she found her husband just always makes me smile, because we moved a little bit unwillingly to this area. And God closed the door on our previous location and opened up this spot. And first, I felt like, how are we ever going to get to know any believers in this area? Well, lo and behold, there's a young people's Bible study just down the street from us. And I find out a lot of homeschool young people go there. It's for 18 and above. She goes to this Bible study and meets the guy that she is now married to. And I just think, across the street, basically, how did this happen?
Praise God.
We're very thankful. And to her, just as much as it's like, wow, before we even knew to think in that direction, God opened up these doors. So taking the next opportunity available, I think, is a good one.
I always like the metaphor that our friends Eric and Leslie Ludy used of giving God the pen of your life and let him write the story. Let God write your love story.
Right.
I think that God can write a more beautiful story than we can if we're being control freaks. So again, there's a balance. We don't want to be lazy and passive. We want to do the things that would be conducive to us meeting people, which is like be where people are and go meet people. But we also don't want to be desperate, and we just want to trust the Lord. So hopefully that gives you some advice. There's no easy answer for that, but be prayerful and consider if God would have you relocate. But service, I think Christian service is one of the best things. It's one of the best, most likely ways you're going to meet a mate is to be busy serving the Lord somewhere. All right, so if you have a question that you want to submit for a future episode, you can call toll-free 1-800-223-6567, 1-800-223-6567, leave a voicemail, and we will answer your question in a future episode. What's our next question?
So this is related to homeschooling and large families. I need advice on how you adequately homeschool a large family with multiple ages. We have 8 children. One is in college, so some of you may say I've already figured this out, but I haven't. I feel like I'm failing every day. How do you teach every child on his or her reading level in math, English grammar, even if you do science and history together as a family? How do you work it out so that everyone is busy with something and the child receiving your help at any given time is able to focus on your teaching without interruption? How do you oversee handwriting, making sure they're using the proper strokes, etc.? Do you allow your children to work through and finish subjects at their own pace? Or do you make all of your children stay on the same subject and move to the next one together? How do you go about checking work, especially of the older children? How do you teach sentence writing, paragraph writing, and paper writing on so many levels adequately? The same questions would go for math.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Brooke wrote a chapter on this topic, how to teach multiple grades at once, in Answers for Homeschooling, top 25 questions critics ask. So make sure you grab a copy of this book, read her chapter in there where she'll go into it a lot more than we'll be able to in the short segment. But if you want to buy a copy of Answers for Homeschooling, you can do that at generations.org. Just go to their web store, type in my name, Israel Wayne, and it'll pull up a list of all of my books, and you can purchase Answers for Homeschooling as well as other books there at the generations.org web store. But we do want to try to answer this briefly. So What are some of your thoughts on how to teach multiple grades at once?
Well, I mean, this has been something that, like part of my life for a long time.
We have 11 children.
We have 11
children. Some people may not know that. I guess we don't say that every broadcast.
We have homeschooled at one time 9 at our biggest span. And so that's, something that has been a journey. And I think every year I revisit it and try to figure out, well, what do I do now? I think one of the best things for children, our children, is keeping them occupied, because so much mischief happens when they're let loose and just on their own.
A child left to himself comes to ruin. That's what the scripture says.
Yeah, and you see it, and so I think, I'm all for some free time. Like, it's just not all day long. And as moms, especially if you're like me, where I want to do everything well, and it's not even just like I want to excel or have it be perfect. It's like I have a limited sense of I want to hyper focus on this one thing or this one child and make it work perfectly. And sometimes I have to say, what's better is to keep everybody moving forward productively to some level, even if that productivity is like, well, this is a little bit of busy work, and even if it's maybe not as productive, like the highest level of productivity, like getting their math lesson done or writing that essay, you're like, okay, it's more penmanship related or whatever. I think it's just good to have a pattern where you're applying them. So I feel like when they reach that 7th, 8th grade is the time where you really start rolling them into having more independent studies.
Independent learning. Mm-hmm.
And this is like, they need a lot of oversight. Like, I'm not suggesting here's the book and go on your room and do it all by yourself. I usually like to keep my children with me until they're at least that 7th, 8th grade before I let them maybe go off to a quiet room by themselves. But that's like no screens, no electronics, nothing that's going to distract them. And I do make sure that I take out the answers in the back, if there's answers in the back, so that there's no temptation there to sneak the answer and just do it. There's got to be a good system to check those answers. And I'll tell you what, I haven't quite figured it out.
I think having an older sibling do the checking is a great way.
I think that's so helpful. And, for some of our young people, they're so fast, they can flip through those things. And if it's taking them 20 minutes every other day or something,
gives them something to do,
that's not so hard. That's a way they can contribute to the family. One thing I hear from large families a lot is that the older siblings say, especially the older daughters, I had to raise my younger siblings. And I've looked at that, not coming from a large family myself, and gone, okay, well, our children, this is a big functioning thing with our home and in the homeschooling. I don't want them to feel like they're raising the younger siblings. But if there's things that I can get them on board with helping, that help them too, such as the cooking or such as, management in other areas of the household, that's better for me to hand off some of those projects, those chores and so forth.
But we need to teach them how to teach too.
Yeah.
Right. So that's part of our biblical mandate that I think we see I think it's Joel 1:3, where it talks about tell your children and have them tell their children and their children the next generation. So we have to teach our children how to be teachers of teachers, right?
Mm-hmm. And you'll see that individually with certain kids are better at doing that. But I do like to have dedicated times where I help them, say, teach phonics. And if it's not going well, I'll pass it up and try again next year, with a certain older student not helping the younger student well. But it just gives them a little bit of an edge into that. So that's one way that we do.
Also the curriculum. So if you have a curriculum that can be self-directed, that's really helpful. So we have kind of two things that we look for in curriculum. The one is we want it to be self-directed, where a student can do it completely on their own without parental involvement.
And that's older,
So let me
fifth or
finish.
sixth.
So that's one thing that we hold over here in the right hand. We want it to be completely self-directed. The student can do it without parental involvement. On the other hand, as parents, we want to be involved. So we don't just want to put our child in front of a computer screen and just have them, doing their school with us, not being involved, right? And a lot of parents just want, I don't want to have the involvement with the actual teaching part, because it's relationship building. So we don't want to cut ourselves out of the relationship. So we want something that is going to accommodate independent learning when needed, but then parental involvement as the norm. And so, we found Masterbooks has kind of been the core of the curriculum that we've used within our home. We also use a lot of Generations material supplementing. And so those resources tend to fit well with that paradigm of the student can do it by themselves when needed.
Right.
But like you said, we want to shift in that kind of, I don't like grades, but 6th, 7th grade, somewhere in there is when you really start helping the student to find more independence.
I think also looking for creative ways to include more lesson time, if you will, into your day, making it a little bit more of a family event, say evenings reading aloud, or if a child has written an essay or is even working on it, being able to read that aloud to the family in the evening time and say, okay, I need help with this part. And everybody can say, I would word it this way. And everybody can kind of pitch in and give a little bit of help there. It goes a long ways.
Yeah. And then certain subjects lend themselves more to group teaching.
Yes.
So history, literature, those are things that you would gather a wide range of ages together. So you might have teenagers all the way down to toddlers in the room, all listening to the story. So what we would do is we would have a textbook and then we have workbooks for each student. It's kind of the setup with most of the curriculum that we use. And so you read out of the textbook and then they answer the questions in their workbook as they listen.
Right.
But often you'll have a youngster, say 2, 4, 6, whatever ages they are, folding clothes maybe on the floor or just building Legos or playing quietly on the floor. And they like to listen to the stories. And so they enjoy being there hearing it. They don't have any formal work they have to do, but there's usually something that they can all do, or at least be learning in that. So those subjects, I think, Bible, of course, history, what am I forgetting? Literature, those are subjects that I think are well conducive for group teaching.
Right.
If you're using a curriculum designed for Christian schools, and that's probably the bulk of what's available for homeschoolers, are programs that were designed for the Christian school classroom, you're going to have a very hard time group teaching those subjects.
Right.
Whereas Masterbooks, Generations, they will have a range. So lots of things there. We obviously have more information that we'd love to share with you when you get the Answers for Homeschooling book. We would encourage you to go to generations.org. Again, visit the web store, look up my books, Israel Wayne, and you can purchase all of them from that web store. If you want the audio books, you'll have to go to masterbooks.com for the audio versions. We would love for you to also visit our website, which is familyrenewal.org, familyrenewal.org. And if you're interested in having us speak for an upcoming event that you're hosting, your church or your family camp or whatever it might be, you can contact us at my speaking site. It's israelwayne.com, israelwayne.com. And again, please call in your questions for a future episode, 1-800-223-6567, 1-800-223-6567. Subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about it. The website is raisingthemup.org, and there's also a Raising Them Up newsletter that you can subscribe to when you go to that web address. So we appreciate you. God bless you.
This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.